to record. So welcome everyone to the Committee on Leveraging Resources. I apologize for the last minute cancellation in December. I just had a personal issue come up, but I'm glad we're getting things back in the swing of things. So for today, what I thought, just reviewing the agenda, is to debrief a bit on Chris Sturm's presentation that was in November to talk about the Wildfire Ready Watersheds Initiative. We had him present as it dovetailed with some of our discussions as a team related to a pre-fire mitigation playbook. And so it would be great to debrief on how that initiative is moving forward on some of the recommendations we flagged and where there are still some components that would be worthwhile to potentially bring to the Forest Health Council at large. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. And then we have Aaron Green and Diana Selby on from the Colorado State Forest Service. A few months back, Aaron and I had brainstormed with the leveraging resources theme, how can we take a look at the state programs, state funding programs that we have, and use those in a way to leverage federal dollars that have come into play with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So we'll have a good tee-up discussion there. And then as we wrap up, we can talk about a next meeting date, topics, action items, and where we want to take this subcommittee. And so before we recorded, had a quick conversation with Christy about thinking through our schedule of when we hold these meetings, our capacity as a group to handle this additional subcommittee with a lot of overlap with the legislative subcommittee and then the Forest Health Council at large. So we'll try to carve out at least 10 minutes to have that discussion here at the end. But before I jump into accepting meeting minutes from November, are there any questions or topics to add to our agenda this afternoon? All right, great. So just to accept our meeting minutes in November, you have those in your email. I'd love to entertain a motion to accept those.
I'll make a motion to accept those minutes as written.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Great. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries.
Aye.
Thank you all. Jumping into our agenda items. So again, looking at a debrief from the Wildfire Ready Watersheds presentation, I sent out Chris Sturm's slides and then also a quick update that he had sent around to some folks and maybe some folks on this subcommittee, just giving a quick update on where that initiative is. They've finished the statewide susceptibility analysis, and they've opened their funding opportunity for communities to apply for a special funding round of the Watershed Restoration Grant Program within the Colorado Water Conservation Board to implement the Wildfire Ready Watershed Initiative. So it'd be great to touch on how we can best support our communities to make sure they're aware of that. But just stepping back, as I was looking back at some of our discussions over the last few months, I can summarize what this committee has discussed in terms of a pre-fire playbook. And some of our themes is that a pre-fire playbook would identify roles, organizations, contacts, and opportunities for technical assistance. And it would bring clarity regarding pre-fire resources and expertise, particularly at the state level, while facilitating consistent communication across field staff. We also talked about the pre-fire playbook acting as a catalyst to bring together all interests in a watershed beyond those that might be immediately connected. So for example, we've talked about water utilities that are partners in watersheds or source water areas that are outside of their service area. We've also talked about the pre-fire playbook connecting pre-fire stakeholders with post-fire actors in coordination with the Wildfire Ready Watersheds effort. We had discussions that there's a growing acknowledgement and need that our mechanical forest treatments are not going to keep up with what's happening on the ground and related to climate issues, and faster than fires and insects and pests will change our forests. So it's essential to figure out that link of pre-fire, fire, and post-fire stages. We also discussed the pre-fire playbook could help determine capacity gaps or identify collaborative stages of readiness to link communities with the most appropriate funding source for the starting point that makes sense for them. And then we paired that with discussions that I think the Forest Health Council has had at large of looking at how do we have a one-stop shop similar to Utah's watershed restoration initiative that acts as a clearinghouse for leveraging resources and showing the projects that are occurring across the state. So just since it's been a while, I wanted to rehash just some of our discussions about this topic. And then in the agenda, I had posed just 2 initial discussion questions of which areas of our current pre-fire playbook recommendation are fulfilled by the Wildfire Ready Watersheds initiatives, and then how can we support communities in using this tool and accessing the funding that's available now. So I'll pause and let others jump in on any thoughts related to those topics.
I do think that with the Wildfire Ready Watersheds program, I do have concerns that coming up with like a separate statewide playbook could actually be duplicative or confuse things if local communities are coming up with kind of their own. I think it's a really good idea. It seems like a lot of counties are really excited about it and local communities. So I hope that they go for the funding and that we can support them in that. I am worried that it could just be duplicative or also confusing if the counties are coming up with more specific guidance or communities.
Yeah, and I kind of echo that a little bit, but then also I have this question that's running through my mind. And I know we've talked about this pre-fire playbook, and you know, it does seem like a good idea after reading through the minutes for the last meeting and that CWCB playbook that they have. I thought, oh my gosh, that seems like a huge undertaking. And I'm wondering if that should be in our wheelhouse, and how does that relate to leveraging resources, particularly as they relate to forest health? And are we better served to maybe try to emulate what Utah has done with their website and being sort of a clearinghouse, like you just said, Amy, for the resources for fire prevention, forest health?
I think I'll echo my colleagues' comments. I think those are really good points. And I kind of like the idea of having that clearinghouse and bringing all counties' work together so that we all can look at what everyone else is doing and just kind of having this one location to find everything and kind of learn from each other. And I think that's really valuable. I know sometimes when I'm looking to see what other counties do for like even governor's policies, it was hard to go on each website and try to find it and kind of be, or even looking at Jefferson County's Forest Health, individual Forest Health Council or Forest Health document, trying to look for that. So I think, I think it could be repetitive, but I do think it would be really great to bring everything together in one place so we can easily access that. Anyone could find that and be able to navigate and look at all these different resources or plans. So just a thought.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. And Commissioner Jack Manali, if you have trouble with Jefferson County Open Space Forest Plan, I'd be happy to send it to you because I helped write it. So I know where it is, but hopefully it's on the website.
Yeah, actually I got it sent, but I kept hearing about it and I couldn't find it, but I finally had Commissioner Kerr send it to me. So I have it now over the holidays, but thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Great holiday reading. The Wildfire Ready Watersheds is great. I don't think this committee ever proposed doing what they did. This conversation sort of started where there's a post-fire playbook that has been very useful. The post-fire playbook is nothing like the wildfire ready watersheds. It's much, less content. It's sort of a immediate helping people get organized immediately after a fire. And our conversations were like, hey, that's been super useful. Is there something analogous we could think of for a pre-fire context, or helping people think through pre, during, and post-fire and more cohesive planning? So I don't know that I think the wildfire ready watersheds is great. I think it's also different than what we were originally talking about. It does fill some of those needs for sure that we were discussing, were needs and potential barriers for people getting moving. But yeah, I don't know what, as a commission or Forest Health Council, our role is to make recommendations to state legislature and governor, right? And so I think we still have a role to make some kind of recommendation about maybe a general philosophy of how we, the benefits of planning, integrating planning with pre-fire and post-fire and across those stages or something along those lines. So a little bit rambly, sorry about that, but I think what we were talking about was different. Wildfire ready watersheds is great and does fill some of those gaps. I don't know how exactly we want to pivot to do something else, or really revisit what is the need we're trying to, what's the problem we're trying to fix here. Maybe we need to go all the way back to that stage, would help.
Brett, do you have any thoughts on, you were saying that the Wildfire Ready Water Initiative certainly checks some of the boxes of what we're talking about. Do you have thoughts on, which ones it does, and if the pre-fire playbook could be more of a higher level document? Because I think some of what we've noticed is a disconnect in all of the different players and actors that need to be at the table from a pre-fire context, so that they can then communicate with the post-fire actors and create some of those links. So I'm wondering if there's still a role for more of a higher level document that still dovetails with the framework that may be created on a community level, but creates almost the higher level view of how do you connect pre-fire and post-fire in a way that might not exist today.
I mute myself again. I think there could be a need. That's where I'm wondering if it's an actual, if our audience is creating a playbook for people on the ground to use, or if maybe we shift and our audience is maybe the state representatives and governor's office and folks like that, about creating it. This gets more into the policy committee, legislative affairs committee, but creating programs that intentionally integrate across pre, during, and post-fire, and making grant programs somehow flexible, that if you're doing pre-fire planning and then a fire happens, you can maybe use that money for post-fire activities, right? Because a lot of that flexibility is not there in a lot of programs right now, which I know Diana and Aaron would, I hope I'm not causing too much heartburn, maybe hoping to try and make your jobs easier managing those programs, but what's needed, I don't know, and who's our audience. Because I guess I think, to answer your question, Amy, I think the Wildfire Ready Watersheds playbook does some of the things we had was identifying opportunities for technical assistance, right? CWCB has stepped up to provide additional technical assistance to some of these groups. And there's other organizations like State Forest Service and others that also provide technical assistance, but this fills part of that gap of like, how do you get help? Call the CWCB, they got lots of money and technical assistance. Yeah, so it checks some of the specifics, but I think there's still room for us to do something.
This is John. So I agree kind of what Brett was saying is, so this is like another tool in the toolbox, right? And I feel like our job as the FHAC is we're the glue that try to bring it together. And I don't know what that glue is in the end, right? But that's kind of what we're at. And I see this filling a gap, a gap where, like, for example, on the East Troublesome fire, we did a bunch of, what was it, straw treatments over the last fall or late summer, early fall. And our HQ is really like, hey, because what are we doing here? Because it was the second year after the fire or whatever. And it really kind of doesn't really fit what we usually do. But having the science to back up those treatments is the piece that they needed to convince HQ to give us the money, right? And it was a lot of money. It was $4 million+ or something. So that's where, like, this kind of stuff, that's that tool or that helps get us there. Now, how do we combine all of these different tools and get them to communicate with the back end? I don't know that's the glue, right? I don't know. That's what we got to kind of figure out. So that's my 2 cents.
Julie, did you have any thoughts you want to share? I just want to make sure we hear from everyone in the group too.
Sure. Am I on mute?
I can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay, sorry. I had to go from the computer to the phone. No, I mean, honestly, I'm just taking a bunch of notes, trying to get my mind around where I think folks have issues and where we might be able to create the answer to the question that was just posed. Like, how do we act as the glue? I'm in thinking mode at the moment.
Yeah, it does seem like a theme in just some of our discussions today has been a need for greater connection, whether that's, across the different technical assistance actors, but just connecting, pre-fire to post-fire conversations. And that can be, in the form of the clearinghouse tool to see where all of the work is happening, or in the form of everybody knows, steps to take to start preparing for a wildfire and how to pivot when it happens pretty quickly to dealing with all of the post-fire actors. And how that's boiled down into a document and to who, I think, is still something we're figuring out.
Yeah, I think it's, how do you get people so it's not a pivot to post-fire, but it's just we've already thought about this and now we have to adjust to the reality of wherever the fire was and that, but we've done enough planning that it's not a pivot. It's just we're doing what we had already talked about. Yeah, how you get there, I think we're still struggling with. I guess I want to come back. There was one tangible thing you've mentioned a couple of times, Amy, of this clearinghouse that other members have mentioned. Is that a place just to start about who is doing what, at least on the pre-fire side, of where is forest management occurring across the state, across all lands? I don't know if that's actually a council activity. Myself and Aaron Green have had some conversations about moving that forward. I guess it'd be great if the council makes a recommendation and Aaron and I are already working on it, then we can check off the box and everybody looks good. But what, I guess, what do people see as the value of that as a council activity or recommendation or a step towards something else?
I like that idea.
Yeah.
And also maybe we could think about, and I just kind of popped in my head, but I don't know, like a workflow for like people that are in the know, like what's step one? Like they don't never done anything. What's step one? What do you do? Go look at this website. Maybe step one. I don't know, but just like, so it's almost like a pre-made plan for them almost of where to get resources, where to look, what to do, who to call, something like that. I don't know.
That is identified in the Wildfire Ready Watersheds framework, is kind of the stakeholder engagement and list. I do think that maybe at the state level that could be useful. John, I agree. I do hope that through the Wildfire Ready Watersheds program, though, that most of the stakeholders needed to actually implement and get work done are more on the local level. But I think in terms of finding like the actual funding resources, like a state level list could be useful.
Well, for example, say there's a county or a municipality or something that wants to do some fire mitigation work, you know, and they've never done it before. Where do they go? What do they do? Who do they talk to? How do they get money? You know, kind of all those questions kind of pre-answered for them. So it's not, they're not doing it on their own. It's like almost like they're having an imaginary hand holding. So yeah, I don't know.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I'll just mention really quickly that Katie from the Forest Collaboratives Network was just named to the Forest Health Council. And she might be a really good person to reach out because I bet she doesn't have a whole lot of subcommittee assignments. But as she is connecting with all these collaborative resources and starting that process, she might be really able to help us in these discussions.
That's a great idea, Aaron. We're always looking for unattached committee members to add them here. But that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it seems like out of the pre-fire playbook ideas that we talked about early on, the two that seem most applicable to still bring to the council at large is the development of a clearinghouse of all of the efforts underway, similar to Utah's tool as a model, and looking at the post-fire playbook and seeing if we can develop something high level that isn't duplicative of the stakeholder list developments that will be done for individual communities for the wildfire ready watersheds, but seeing if there's a companion document that's maybe similarly high level, that's just a starting point that likely sends them pretty quickly to the Wildfire Ready Watersheds Initiative, especially now, given that it has a substantial amount of funding attached to it.
Yeah, I guess I wonder something if we were going towards a clearinghouse. Aaron brought this up last time that the part of the success of Utah's clearinghouse is there are requirements in order to get state funding. You have to report things to the database, and there's not that requirement for Colorado programs right now. So I don't know if that's something that we need state legislature approval, if that's something that entities that fall within the Department of Natural Resources can just write into their grant programs, you know, the CWCB and the State Forest Service and those kind of entities that manage a lot of the state funds. Yeah.
That's a great flag, Brett, and a good model to follow on so that it's used and updated. And I'm wondering, Commissioner Shattuck McNally, you know, if we recommend a clearinghouse, it will take money and resources. So I imagine this would at some point bleed into a legislative recommendation to fund the development of this clearinghouse. And then, like you said, Brett, it could require some statutory cleanup or potentially just in the guidelines too. We could think through that because we might not need to amend all of the statutes, but to include the need to update your projects in the clearinghouse if you've received state funding, or think through how do we keep it updated.
Yeah, I think that's something that you certainly could bring to the whole Forest Health Council. We'd have to get the whole Forest Health Council to kind of, you know, or you introduce it to the Legislative Council as a suggestion, and then we can kind of vet it or have a further discussion on how that would look. I think, you know, this legislative session would not be a good thing trying to add it for next session. I think having a discussion about how much money and things like that, I think this would take maybe bringing it to the whole council and kind of seeing what people think. I do see the value in this. I think we have to be very, even like with this discussion, we're still kind of talking some ideas. I think we'd have to get really clear on what we would be talking about. And I think I made this mistake last year. I said, oh, it's just a little fix in the statute that we need to change with the code protection officer bill and the tiny home bill that I worked on last year. And it ended up being a huge stakeholder process and kind of just, evolved into a bigger thing. So I always want to caution that some cleanup sometimes takes a little bit more time than you think. And we're doing some of that cleanup right now to look at some changes for the broadband bill from 2005 that's inhibiting efforts right now for the state and communities. So there's probably some value in looking, in depth at what we need to go through and kind of see what barriers and challenges are stopping or inhibiting some of the work. So I think it's worth merit, and I think it's further discussion. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we can talk about order of bringing this up. And we do have I think a Forest Health Council meeting here in a couple of weeks, and maybe there's an opportunity just in our roundups of what we've talked about in the subcommittees to tee this up and then further refine before it goes in front of the legislative subcommittee and the full council for recommendation. And I totally agree that this would be for next session, and that your words of caution of simple cleanups are never simple. So,
Yeah.
and then I do want to recognize, and I apologize, we didn't hear who the phone number is, the 970, but you have your hand up and happy to hear you.
Well, I assume that's me. This is Hillary Cooper, and sorry, I'm driving, so hopefully I'll have you long enough to just quickly say this. But as I've been listening to all of the ideas out there, I thought of the CDA's STAR program, the Department of Ag STAR program. It's basically it's a program that actually I've worked on, and we stole it from Illinois. But it identifies, it's for soil health, it's to improve soil health across the state. So it identifies the principles of soil health, and then it creates a menu, basically, of options that are available that, each local jurisdiction can pick and choose according to their soil type, or, so, hopefully you can hear me kind of comparing this to forest health. And it's basically a way that guides CDA's prioritization. It guides their funding. It's a very simple tool that local landowners can sign up to use. And it's a framework that essentially gets at this program objective of CDA's of improving soil health across the state. So I'm not sure if it would fit here. I'm actually looking at it for some land use objectives as well right now, but so it's very fresh in my mind, but it's perhaps something that we could take a look at to see if it's something that it's already been developed, and if we could tweak it for forest health, that might help guide some of these conversations. And I don't think that we would need to do anything legislatively to get there.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Cooper. That's a great idea to take a look at that program and how it might be applicable. I appreciate you bringing that up.
I've sent you a little note. I have to jump on this other call. It's another legislative call. So I apologize. I'll read the minutes and get caught up, but I appreciate everyone's time, and I apologize I had to jump out early, but thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks so much, Commissioner. Just to wrap us up with this topic so we can move to Colorado State Forest Service programs. Would it be worthwhile to try and have somebody from Utah talk about their program if anyone has contacts to speak to this group? Brett, did you have something?
I had something else, but I think that'd probably be useful.
Okay. If
Yeah.
anyone has a good contact, let me know, or I think it'll be pretty easy to try and track down someone and see if we could get them at a next meeting. All right, go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, I think, I guess I wanted to clarify. I do think, I agree with what Commissioner Shattuck Manali was saying. Small changes to text takes monumental efforts often. But I have seen lots of grant programs. The COSWAP, Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Plan, does, I think, require people to submit spatial information about the treatments they're doing. And some of the other programs are starting to go this way. So I don't know that it does take a legislative fix. I think it's more the different program managers and the grant programs, which are various with CWCB, State Forest Service, DNR, Division of Fire Prevention and Control. There's lots of entities that manage state funds that go to Forest Health. But as a Forest Health Council, that's where we offer a diversity of people and connections and can connect with a lot of those folks. So I think that's the way I would suggest to try and go first before we try and do anything through the legislature. And I also just want to clarify, we mentioned in passing a little bit that Aaron and I were working on something. So just what is that something? We had actually talked about it when we talked about the Utah database a couple months ago. But just compiling on a voluntary basis, asking all of the different land management agencies from federal to state and also county and some nonprofit organizations to submit their forest management activities, and then put them all into one spatial database. So that's what we were talking about doing. And that could potentially, live as part of the Forest Atlas that the State Forest Service maintains or something. I don't know that we have to create a new web. Hopefully we don't have to create a new web portal for it. But that's sort of what we've been talking about doing and hopefully moving forward on some level. But the problem with that is it's whatever data from the federal agencies, we can download that from their websites, they upload it. And the State Forest Service collects data from their own folks, but the other people and other activities are harder to track down and voluntarily reported. So that, just to clarify for everybody, so we're all on the same page, that's kind of what we were talking about doing, is just making a map of all the forest activity that's been happening.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Brett. And Aaron, did you have some to add?
Yeah, I was just going to tie into that a little bit. Part of the challenge of that is everybody's data is in a little bit different of a format with different information associated with it, right? So how do you convince the Forest Service to change the attributes in their spatial data to match those of the BLM or of state forestry, so we have a consistent way so that information is really valuable to whoever needs it? We can certainly do polygons, but a lot of times you don't know what was really done on that polygon. Was it something really small and not impactful, or was it something really impactful? But because Brett mentioned it, I just wanted to highlight that the Forest Atlas does have some really good information about current forest health conditions across the state of Colorado. All of the layers in the Colorado State Forest Service's Forest Action Plan are in there, so it specifically highlights the areas where forest health concerns are, where wildfire concerns are, wildlife concerns, and watershed health concerns, and it prioritizes them. So that's a pretty good, I don't know if it's, I haven't looked at that STAR program that was mentioned, but it does provide that spatial way where anybody can kind of look at their particular area and evaluate either a composite map or those different categories, those different main categories of forest health for their given area. And that's available to anybody in the state as an option. So it's a good resource.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And just to wrap us up on this topic, and we can actually turn it back to you, Aaron, but we can bring up some of these ideas at the next Forest Health Council meeting as we do report outs on what we've been discussing with the subcommittee. I can look into seeing if anyone from Utah's clearinghouse is willing to come talk about their experiences and how they set this up. And then from there, we can decide on potentially refining this for a more clear recommendation to talk with the companion legislative subcommittee and tee up potentially for next year's Forest Health Council report out to the legislature and governor. But pivoting to the Colorado State Forest Service funding programs and how we might think about our Leveraging Resources Committee to more directly use some of our state programs to leverage federal dollars. This is something Aaron and I had talked about many months ago, just thinking about if there are ways to better connect state programs and use the matching capacity to develop more competitive applications on the federal side. So Aaron, maybe I'll just directly turn it over to you for any updates on what you all are thinking about as an agency on how to use your programs, or any ideas that we can tee up with this group for more discussion too.
Well, I want to be real clear that I described this as a half-baked idea, right? I mean, it's just something that's kind of out there that I'm aware of, and it started with some conversations with CFRI and Tony Chang when he mentioned this idea that was really kind of rattling around in my mind of capacity begets capacity, right? And I think he mentions that a lot, but it's the idea that some places in Colorado are being really successful in getting really good work done on the ground because they have the resources already in place to get that work done. Chaffee County, Summit County are just a couple of examples. I think Boulder with their new 1A initiative is moving in that direction as well. But those entities have the ability, because they have some resources, to apply for either state or federal programs to do forest health treatments because they have the match already kind of in their pocket. Once they have that money in their pocket, they can apply for funding at like a 50-50 match level or a 75-25 match level. And once they get that federal or state grant program, now they can put that money maybe back in their pocket while they pursue grants from the opposite person, right? So if you got a federal 50-50 grant, you can match that with state funds. But to get that federal grant, you kind of need to be able to show that you have the match. The state's kind of similar in the same way, where we don't necessarily require you to be able to fully demonstrate that you have that match for like our fur worm programs or some of our other programs. But it certainly helps your application if you have that match and can articulately identify where that match is coming from. But once you have the grant, then you can start chasing those other federal funds. I know we are getting ready to roll out, and Diana would probably have more information, but it's probably still early to talk about some of the opportunities that are coming out in the near future. But it's just kind of that idea is, how do we figure out a way to make it easier for somebody to be able to clearly articulate and identify matching funds to get one grant, and then to go through the process of trying to find the opposite funds so that the match is being contributed equally by both the federal government and the state government in some cases, because they don't apply for it at the same time and they're not combined. California does a crazy thing, but they've got a lot of resources to be able to do it. They combine all of these in one and have a central clearinghouse where they can allocate all of those grants, both state and federal, in one particular way. I think that would be way too heavy of a lift, but I guess I was just trying to think about this committee and the idea of leveraging resources, how to provide people those opportunities to be successful in applying for the first grant, to be able to then get the second grant to get the work done if they don't have that capacity to begin with, so that the people who are already being successful will continue to be successful. But how do you what's the idea of readiness, right? You know what, everybody needs something different, but there's a lot of people in kind of a second or a third tier with a little bit of help could operate the same way or think about RCPP programs or Joint Chiefs like other programs that require a match, but they can't get into it because they don't have the match to begin with, or the match is a challenging prohibitive factor into it. Does that make any sense? So, and I've talked to Diana about this, and I just want to be really clear. Our furworm grant opportunities, sometimes it's the amount of money available out there. You can apply for our furworm grant opportunities and not have the match fully identified. But in a competitive process where lots of people are applying for that same money, the people who have that funding and that match fully identified are often more successful. And that's where the people who currently have the capacity are being successful, but there's that second tier that maybe just need a little bit of help to be able to apply for the first one, so that then they could apply for the opposite one to make it work. That's the idea. I don't know exactly how to get there or what that solution would be, but that's kind of the half-baked idea of maybe this leveraging resources committee might be able to come up with some solutions to that challenge.
Thanks, Aaron. Does anyone have any immediate thoughts? Commissioner Cooper, I just, is that a new hand? I know you're driving, so it's hard to put it.
Yeah, it is.
Yep, perfect.
Sorry, I forgot to star nine my hand down, but now I'm star nining my hand up. Thank you for noticing. So I just have a bit of a wild card question. You mentioned the California model, where they combine the federal and state funds. I will just throw out there from our perspective at the local level, applying for both state and federal grants and managing all those and managing the reporting and the applications and all of that, as you know, you're managing a collaboration and potentially a project and funding sources at the local level is extremely challenging for many of our smaller counties, less resources. What about the state Forest Service working towards aligning with NRCS goals and objectives of ecological health and being able to get some of those funds matched at the state level, so that the collaboratives, wildfire mitigation projects only have to apply for one pot of funds?
Diana, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that it still doesn't solve the issue. I mean, so NRCS and some of their objectives through the funding that they have is still federal dollars. And so whether the state were to apply for funding that way, it's not really, it just don't work that way. It's we don't go directly to NRCS and apply for like EQIP dollars. It's still going to be an individual community or a landowner or that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure if that's what you were getting at. But I will say there's a variety of different things that we're doing to kind of hopefully help meet that. So as Aaron mentioned with furworm, the capacity building definition was expanded in the previous legislation. So that kind of includes that opportunity for communities to hire individuals to help with planning, to help with grant writing, that kind of stuff. So that's an opportunity that's out there. We do ask that folks, say, here's where our match will come from and have kind of that identified. But if they don't have the match yet and they're applying for federal grants, if it's a well-written application and the technical advisory panel wants to support it, we'll still support it. And if for some reason their federal grant doesn't come through and they just can't find match, then maybe we pull that funding back. But if they can find match in a different way, we can still work with them. So we're trying to be more flexible, or trying to be as flexible as possible related to that effort. Some other things that we've done. So for example, we had the Good Neighbor Authority program with the U.S. Forest Service, and we do work, on federal lands. But we also recently, a few years ago, got another grant related to the Good Neighbor program, which was, we call it our Adjacent Lands Grant, and it was basically funding for non-federal lands. And so we were able to just, distribute that out sort of internally to our field offices so that they could align those private and state and private lands that were right next to the federal lands where they were already planning that work, and they could just do it all together. So that kind of concept, we've really been trying to, tell the Forest Service that worked really well. That's makes it kind of gets rid of that whole different timeframes and different, applications and stuff. It just helps us, like, here's the pot of money and here's the area we're going to work, and we can bring the right dollars from the right account for the various different pieces of the project. And we're looking into the same thing with the BLM. And so I know John Ring is aware of this. We've been working with some of those folks about, considering how the state could potentially look into applying for funding that would, again, be like adjacent work to any of the GNA BLM projects that we have. So we're trying to figure out ways to make that happen. With NRCS, I think we haven't gotten there yet. So specifically to that question, it's something we can kind of keep working on with them and talking about how we could align the different programs that we have and maybe see if we can do something similar. I'm not sure. I'd have to think through that piece at this point. But and then the other programs that we've have coming online, the incentives for local governments, and again, that is something that communities, local governments already have to be doing something, so that, to Erin's point, they already have to be kind of passing, legislation or doing some kind of thing where they're pooling their resources and making that effort towards wildfire mitigation activities. So that I think is going to kind of serve mostly the communities that are already, taking those efforts, but certainly it will hopefully incentivize others to kind of consider doing the same thing. And then we also will have community wildfire protection plan, like funding for, building capacity, updating plans, prioritizing, developing projects for implementation of those plans. So that funding we should be getting out the door this calendar year. And so that will be another opportunity. And I can't answer a lot of specific questions about that one because we're still kind of finalizing how that program is going to work. But there's a lot of opportunity with us with that particular funding to not necessarily require 50-50 match and those kinds of other things we have with some of our other programs. And so that will allow us to reach out to those underserved communities, or those ones that maybe don't currently have capacity to even put together a good grant application, and hopefully get them jump started on being able to build up that capacity and have some more assistance with that. So those are some things we're already kind of doing, I guess, just to answer that. And then, like I said, as far as the NRCS and some of that, we'd have to, I think through and talk with them about how we could align the programs we have and see if that would, make sense.
Thanks, Diana. That's helpful. Christina, before we jump to you, I just want to make sure, Commissioner Cooper, you didn't have any follow-up questions just with your hand. And again, I know you're driving, so it's hard to put it up and down. All right, go ahead, Christina.
I think too, thinking about the point that Brett brought up was the flexibility with funding, depending on, the different phases of fire. So pre-fire planning, post-fire recovery. I think that funding flexibility with the different programs, because there are so many different programs, and NRCS is just for one phase, or, you know, like, same with all the different funding programs. So I think that is something to consider as well. I think that was a really good point, Brett. And I think it does fit into this discussion about match and kind of funding flexibility for the communities. So just wanted to reiterate that point.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. That's a good conversation from earlier, not to lose sight of. Julie, did you have a thought?
I did, just as I'm sort of soaking all this in and sort of bringing myself up to speed. The one thing that would throw out there for thought is the fact that, you know, we're talking a lot about communities or people who have the capacity, right? And potentially, it sounds like underserved communities may or may not already have that capacity, right? So if you don't have it, how do you build it? And a challenge there. And as you think about a program where you're perhaps identifying principles of pre-fire readiness or something else, right? So that you're connecting the people and helping them create a path from pre-fire readiness to post-fire and all steps in between. I guess the thought that's jumping into my brain is don't lose sight of sort of non-governmental opportunities, right? To help those folks build capacity and just making them aware that those resources may exist too. So for example, you know, corporate foundations who align with the objectives that people are trying to achieve in terms of, you know, wildfire readiness, you know, environmental health, et cetera, other things, may have grants available either to communities or individuals that could give them that first step, right? That could enable them to hire a grant writer to start building that capacity. So maybe just thinking, what are the other avenues that could allow someone to build that capacity? It's just a thought that's coming to my mind.
Thanks, Julie. That's a great thought on especially some of the corporate foundations or philanthropy that can take on some early stage risk more so than public resources. And I think that's a good flag to note. Just since we are, Brett, did you want to say something quickly? Because we do need to wrap up just with next meeting dates. And I think this is a topic that everyone can keep in mind and kind of spin their wheels on this idea of how do we use state programs and the flexibility we might have more so at the state level to make sure we're as competitive as possible for larger scale federal programs. But Brett, go ahead.
I just put it in the chat too from the Word document on our draft recommendations was what Aaron was talking about is already in there of helping identify sort of collaborative stages of readiness, of linking the communities with their most appropriate funding source. So making sure there aren't gaps and you know, not all of the money goes to one spot, but the right kind of money goes to the right spots, which is challenging, but was already talked about and in there.
Yeah, that's a great flag. I think that's a great idea that we can figure out how to plug in the right spot. But just in our last 5 minutes, I know we wanted to loop back as we start 2023, thinking about our meeting schedule and next steps as a group. And we had tried the first Monday of every month over the lunch hour, which sometimes tends to overlap with holidays. And I know we're balancing schedules, especially with multiple commissioners that are tied up in meetings most of the week. So I just want to tee up if folks have ideas for a better standing time, if we want. I think the other subcommittee might meet on Fridays. But just open it up for just some discussion on our meeting frequency and date going into the next year. We can keep Mondays, but yep, any thoughts?
Mondays, it overlaps with the standing national meeting for me, so. But I like the noon, you know, I mean, there's not a lot of meetings at noon for me anyways. So pretty much any other day except for Monday.
Is there an interest? I think it's hard to move it to any other day but Friday without losing some of our county commissioners. I think there's a few people on the legislative committee. I think they meet on Fridays too. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. The cadence.
Yeah, we
those-
meet Friday mornings at 8:30. So
Okay.
pretty soon we have county meetings on Thursdays and Fridays. And it's a specific schedule that I could provide to you, but it's our TCI county meetings. So those are kind of tricky to jump out of or time it appropriately so you don't miss the subject you're supposed to be there for. But, you know, trying to plan around commissioners is tough. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Commissioner Cooper. Would Fridays at noon work better for this group, just to avoid some standing meetings? Or is that, I mean, that'll be tough too.
That doesn't, for Fridays do not work. They're actually my days off. But that being said, the same thing went for the legislative committee. I can remove myself as a voting member and just be an observer, and I'm totally fine with that. So I don't want to hold back progress. So I'm totally fine. with
Yeah.
that.
Thanks, Christina. I know we don't want to lose you. I mean, we could try Mondays at 11, Mondays earlier. Brett, any thoughts?
I guess, yeah, I have other Friday morning meetings, and Friday at noon works okay for me. But also I found these conversations useful. I think we're still working on getting to, you know, products or action items kind of thing. Before we get too much into the date and time, are people thinking still monthly, or do we want to go more or less, or stick with monthly and kind of keep seeing where we can get to? Maybe that's a better conversation before we pick out a time.
Yeah, good point. Any thoughts on frequency?
Yes, I feel like if we meet less is going to happen. We're not at an action item kind of thing right now, but if we keep up monthly, maybe we'll see. I'm willing to give it at least another 6 months of monthly and kind of keep pushing and see where we go. But I also always caution against having meetings for the sake of meetings.
Yeah. Sounds like we'll keep monthly. We have reached out to just some of our initial committee members, keeping an eye on attendance. And so we've had a few folks drop off of the committee, just given their conflicts and schedules, and wanting to participate more in an advisory capacity and keeping up with what we're doing. So we're narrowing into a smaller group of committee members to make sure we continue our quorum and momentum on these topics.
Were we actually meeting monthly, or was it every 2 months, Amy?
We had a monthly schedule, and the one slip up is we canceled December. So that was
Okay.
every 2 months.
We do
Yeah.
monthly. Okay.
Well, why don't we can keep, I mean, I suppose our next meeting is coming up here soon, which will help us keep some momentum on February 6th, unless people have identified a real hiccup in that date. And we can kick off that meeting, just picking up that discussion when maybe we're more fresh in the hour, and agree on continuing the monthly schedule, and we can pick back up if there's any other day or time that would be better for the full group.
That sounds good. Yeah, I have the February 6th meeting on my calendar, and I can make it that day.
Great. Well, I think that will help us keep some momentum and figure out some next steps for the group. Any other closing thoughts before we adjourn? Thanks so much, everyone, for the flexibility and joining today.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks,
All
Amy.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Good to see you. All
Thank you.
right, take care.